If you want to get all 9s, then you can. It won't be easy, but it'll be easier than you think. I managed to get all 9s whilst remaining a functioning member of society and without becoming a full-time NEET. If you want to get all 9s as well while still touching grass, then the 5 tips I'm going to give in this video are for you. I realise this does sound really dramatic, but I do think it illustrates the point very well. When GCSE is so much more about breadth and depth, you realise there's a lot of content that you actually know very well and that you don't need to be spending hours and hours on because you're already very competent at it. It's so easy when that's the case to just kind of sit down and revise the stuff you're comfortable with, the easiest stuff. But if you want to get all 9s, you can't be doing that. You actually have to put in a bit of hard graft on some of the more mundane crap like plant sciences, whatever. And then what you realise is the stuff that you weren't previously competent in, you can become more and more competent in. Rather than just focusing on the stuff that you know you already have a pretty good grasp of, you'll only ever gain 1 or 2 marks doing that. But as soon as you start actually working out what am I not as good at and reflect on what parts of the course you're weaker at, by working on them you'll go from getting hardly any marks on them at all to getting 100% consistently. And it's this approach that's going to help you get all 9s by, rather than having a few subjects that you're very strong at, you'll find that if you can get every subject or every topic area to be relatively decent, then you'll get a higher average number of marks, rather than relying on a few particular topics to really boost your marks. It'll be much easier to get these marks by stepping out of your comfort zone and not just answering the question of what's the role of the mitochondria. To get these top grades, you don't have to sell your soul to the academic overlords of AQA and LXL. You don't have to be sitting at your desk hours on end desperately trying to memorise all of these facts by rote. What you're actually better off doing is doing work in smaller batches. I tend to do mine in batches of maybe 30 minutes to an hour, and what you find then is rather than working for 3 hours straight and you're actually working only at half of your capacity by the first hour, if you keep doing it in 30-minute batches, then not only are you going to have a lot more free time, but actually you're going to be working at a higher level consistently because you're going into each study session at a renewed feeling. Rather than having to sacrifice hours and hours and hours, you'll find that you can actually get better grades by working more frequently for shorter durations at a higher intensity. You're not then going to have to sacrifice your friends just so you can get these top grades, and instead what you realise is that by working little and often you gain more time, you work with greater focus and intensity, but you're not getting burnt out every single night and have to have 2 days off in order to recover. If you think that you might struggle to work more frequently for shorter durations of time because you'll just keep getting distracted and sidetracked on things like Netflix, it can happen. You might want to try something like the Pomodoro technique. It's the cheeky technique that you see all the productivity people talk about. And it means that you can work in these 25-minute batches, 5-minute break, 25-minute batch, 5-minute break, and so on and so on. And then it's far more regimented and structured rather than kind of leaving it up to your own accord and working out, okay, I'll do 45 minutes now, and I'll do an hour next, and I'll do 20 minutes here. You might want to try and have more frameworks so you actually know what you're working around. If you can do this and work here and there after you get back from school, then you'll find out that actually you have a lot more free time and you're not completely zonked. You're not working from the moment you get in until the moment you go to sleep. Instead, actually what you're doing is coming in, doing 2 sessions quickly, then having an hour and a bit break, then you have maybe some dinner, then you go back, you do a couple more sessions, you have another hour-long break, you do a couple more sessions, and suddenly, rather than having these long, bulky revision sessions, actually you've split up your work so much more that you realise there's actually so many hours in the day that you can use and you don't have to sell your soul for. There'll be plenty of people who want to go for this kind of Hormozy and Goggins attitude, and if you want to go for that, then fair play, but for the vast majority of us, that's not very sustainable. And so if you actually do just use it in these more bitty chunks of work, then you'll realise that it's far more sustainable and that you can keep up revising as more of a marathon rather than this heavy intensity at the start, and then you start tapering off and realise you haven't done any work for the past 2 weeks because you're so exhausted from doing it the previous weeks. No, you don't want to be using your phone when you don't have to, so if you're doing exam questions, then it's probably best not to use your phone because it's going to be so easy to get distracted on there. But I do think that trying to digitalise as much as you can is a very good idea. So I digitalised my flashcards using Notion, and what this meant is I didn't have to spend hours fanning around kind of categorising, writing, colouring in and highlighting. Instead, I was actually being able to systematically order my flashcards and not having to worry about how I put them all together and spending hours writing them. Instead, I can make them as I went along, and it was far more efficient to type them up. The beauty of having them online as well is that you can sync them up across devices. So you can have them on the school computer, you can have them on the family laptop, and then you have them on your phone. And the advantage of having them on your phone specifically is that when you get these little nuggets of time in the day, whether you're queuing online to get some food or you're waiting for the bus, you can actually get out your phone and use that time to get work done. And this is then going to feed back into the previous tip of, if you've got 10 minutes done while you're waiting for the bus, then that's 10 minutes less you have to spend when you're at home in the evening. And so by having this on you all time, on your phone, you don't have to worry when you're waking up in the morning, well, what can I bring with me? Can I get this set of flashcards with me while I'm waiting on the bus? Instead, your phone is always on you, and you're prepared then wherever you are, whatever day it is, whatever time it is, you can get some work done while you're waiting, and otherwise you'll be unproductive. If you are going to use your phone though, you need to have some discipline, and the best way to do that, if you don't think you're going to be able to control yourself, is to, chuck your phone on airplane mode, or you can even put it on the grayscale. That means everything's like less colourful and you're less likely to go and press on the other apps. So there are ways to mitigate the risk of you going and fanning around doing your own thing on other apps. The advantages of having them on your phone though will outweigh the disadvantages, I think. So to do well in exams, you need to know what to know and when to use it. Now, the first of those two questions is easy enough to sort out. There are specifications available for the GCSE courses, and what this means is not only can you scroll through and find, okay, topic 1.1.2, I need to know this, and you get these bullet points that you can use. Not only do you know the content to know, but you also need to know the depth of which you need to have that understanding. So you'll find that some questions, when you read through in the specification, they'll make a comment and say students need to be able to outline this fact. In which case, it's clearly something they only ever give to you in a 1-mark question. You need to be able to recall that information and put it on a dotted line. You might find that other topics though, which say you need to be able to outline and explain. In which case, maybe there'll be a 2 or 3-mark question you have to answer, so you need to understand that bullet point in a little bit more detail. There might even be some sections that say outline, understand, explain and evaluate, in which case you want to make sure you have far better revision resources for that particular bullet point, so that you can make a point of answering maybe 6-mark questions for that specific bullet point. Like I said earlier, GCSEs are far more about breadth than depth, so you don't want to be learning some random physics equation that your teacher gave you because they thought it was cool and they've got a hobby for boats. Instead, I think GCSEs is far more about minimum input for maximum output, and the best way to achieve that is to know exactly which facts you need to know and the extent to which you need to know them. So now you've learned what you need to know, it's now about putting it into practice, and the best way I think to do this is to do exam papers. The best thing about this is that you can kind of use the feedback system, so that if you find that your flashcards weren't gearing up properly because there's some random phrase that keeps coming up, which they always seem to do, there seems to be some sort of phrase that you need to keep on using for a specific topic. In that case, you can use it to adjust your flashcards and adjust your revision so that in the future you don't get caught out by the same cheap tricks. You'll be able to find these question papers on the websites of the exam boards, although you might be able to find them on other websites that collate different papers. Physics and Maths Tutor comes to mind. But don't be too hasty, because it's all too easy to use all the papers in one go, and you want to save a few for just before the exam. You don't want to have none to do in the weeks preceding, because then you'd have no idea where you actually stand. It might be worth leaving the last 3 years worth of exams for the last month. That means that you can see how you would have fared in the most recent cohorts. You really don't want to be taking chances when there are these muggy exam boards that are really picky with certain phrases you need to be using. So make sure to use these mark scheme wisely, and don't make a point of just consistently checking them while you're doing the exam paper, because that's going to do you no favours in the long run. If you're only watching this near the end of year 11 and exams coming up, then it's doable, but it's going to be a bit of a slog. But if you're someone who's about to start GCSEs or is still in the very early stages of year 10, then you're in a good place, because while everyone else is cacking themselves because it's exam season and they've got nothing to revise from, or because they didn't start earlier, if you just start doing this little and often practice and you start implementing these tactics very early on, that means that by the time it's January and you've got exams in May and June, you're in good stead. Everything in this video has been set out so you don't have to be some full-time neek or naturally intelligent prodigy. Instead, if you just implement these tactics and steadily build up your resources over time, then by the time it is exams, you can sit there looking smug because you've been building up resources properly. I hope that's been useful for everyone and you've realised that you don't need to be at your desk full time in order to get all 9s, but rather everyone can get all 9s, as long as you're very clever with how you work. It's about minimum input and maximum output. I'll see you in the next one.